All right, so here's part two. I want to thank Mal and Alec for wanting to talk to me again and answering all my nerdy, annoying questions. But people seem to really enjoy your guys' banter. So,
Well, I hope they do because I mean, this week I've put on my best aftershave.
All right, yeah. So let's get right to it. So, might as well start with the reason why I'm talking to you guys, which is, of course, Alan Holdsworth. And I wanted to ask if you guys had cheers, any specific memories working with him, or any other stories. I know you told a couple before, but if there's any others that you have, because I'm sure that there's probably plenty. I know, Alec, you told me where you had to go out to Italy to help him out with something.
No,
So,
that was me.
Oh, that was you. I'm sorry. That's why the story's all conflated in my head. But yeah, if you guys got any other stories or memories of Alan.
Well, that was Alec touched on that because that was the Stanley Jordan tour that we were talking about.
I think it was Stanley Clarke.
I beg your pardon.
It was
Stanley Clarke.
87. It was like the May or June of 87, that tour.
It was May because it was Cup final day. And
we weren't going to talk about football.
Well, it was in Milan. It was Cup final day, which was I was really looking forward to watching. And Alan came on to me to say that there was something drastically wrong with the console, and he had these gigs to do. So I got a console. It was pre-common market days, so I had to get a carnet sorted out, which I did. I seem to remember I wrote most of it myself, and got a flight down from Heathrow to Milan. My brother-in-law picked me up from Milan and scooted us into the stadium, and Alan just took the console onto stage, programmed it on the fly at a speed like you wouldn't believe, and did the gig. And then we went back after the gig, and Stanley Clarke was on the bus. He said, "I wish I could get this sort of service out of Alembic," because I think he was using Alembic at the time. And I said, "Trust me, you'll be paying for this because I've just missed the cup final." And he didn't even know what the cup final was. I don't know whether you know, but yeah, that was a pretty long weekend, and a lot of beer was drunk, and I ended up almost missing the plane coming back. I was fortunate enough to have a taxi driver who switched the meter off because I'd run out of cash, and he took me to Malpensa, I think it was at the time. It might have been Linate, I don't know, one of the Milanese airports. And Alan finished off his gig, and that might have been, one of the last tours that he did with the act, because of the unreliability of it. It was sad. It's such a lovely instrument, such a brilliant concept, such a wonderful piece of kit. If only the reliability had been there.
Yeah. Do you remember what was wrong with it, with Alan's console, or you just said, "The hell with it, just give me another one"?
No, I don't even think I bought. Sorry,
I'd put a bet that it was something to do with the battery backup system, because we did a mod for the battery system on the console because the originals had a problem and they would corrupt memories occasionally. So there was a mod that was fitted, and even that helped a lot, but it still wasn't 100%. And I don't know if you remember, Mal, the backlights used to fail.
Oh, the backlights! I changed. I stopped doing it in the end.
Yeah, it was pointless. It only lasted 2 weeks.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, the thing was, I wasn't employed as a sales engineer. I was employed as a sales director manager, But within a very short space of time, I was doing the PR, I was doing the sales, and I was doing the sales engineering. I was going all over the place, replacing things,
Yeah,
And
good.
the backlight, in the end, I got a feeling we ran out and couldn't get any more.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And so in the end, I was not selling these things with backlights. I was selling them without backlights.
Yeah.
and it's a bloody difficult thing to actually. Can you actually replace a backlight on that screen or not with stuff that's around at the time that's around now?
I don't think you can. I don't think.
No.
I don't think they were widely manufactured. I think they were a special that was done maybe to our spec.
Yeah.
I don't think they were fully tested. I think that it was a faulty batch, really. But you know, we weren't making hundreds of axes, so you know, if we got 100 backlights, you know, that's what we use. But they were a nightmare. Yeah,
That's really interesting because I had no idea. Because you know, the one that I have, it just, you know, it looks like a dot matrix printer, like a calculator.
does it glow?
No, I had no idea that it even glowed.
It's supposed to glow.
Interesting, because
Well, you can't send it back, you know that, don't you?
well, maybe I'll have someone that's interested in this figure out a way to modify it. But because one of the things that Alan would talk about is when he first got it and he played it live in February of '86, he didn't have the song step feature where you're like, you know, you had the little expression, the pedal to move the banks forward and backwards. So you see him going by hand, and he said, you know, it was a disaster because he had to remember all these like little things. I also would imagine that the SynthAxe was not first developed for live use, but more studio use, and then it turned into live use, because it's interesting that that wasn't there implemented in the beginning. But the other thing that he mentioned is sometimes you just couldn't see what you were looking at on stage, you know, because of the lights. And there is a thing, you know, to set the darkness, the contrast on it. But so I imagine, it's because you just can't see. I had no idea that it was actually supposed to be backlit.
No, but it wasn't a thing at the time. I mean, people were racing ahead with technology. I mean, I've got a Tascam behind me here, and it's got a tiny little what's it called? Tiny little LED. There's no LED on it, but it's a digital recorder which dumps down to CDs and all the rest of it. But the screen on it is so tiny, and I've got a light just above it there, so I can actually see what's going on. I think, you know, the actual human interface with a lot of things in those days was totally forgotten about. The user, you know, it wasn't to the fore. As long as we got the technicality of everything right, and I think it was, you know, the actual people that are using it could sort of whistle, you know, and which is a shame, because that's the first thing you see is that, isn't it? So,
yeah.
You know,
and I think the technical challenge of making an instrument that did what Bill Aitken had in his vision was a pretty big, setting the bar pretty high to make it work. So nice things like user interface came second. You know, let's make the thing and actually have it function first.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I was just watching, because I'm looking at electronic stuff on YouTube. You know, I'm trying to learn from people fixing whatever. And I watched a series where somebody bought the Apollo guidance system that, you know, we're able to land a thing on the moon, and reverse engineering it to get it to work. Of course, they have all the schematics and everything like that. But one of the things that they talked about was the DSKY, a DSKY. And it was the actual visual interface. And they say, well, how can we do this so we can actually have the astronauts really see it? I forgot they developed something where they like put some photosensitive material on I don't know, whatever they designed, but it's like incredibly bright, you know, for that thing when you're in the darkness, is whatever, if something happens that they can actually see. And that's, you know, 1966 or whatever it was. So I guess that technology for 20 years had not really improved, so you can actually see what you're looking at. And so I don't know.
Well, I don't know whether you remember, last week, I think did I show you a step guitar?
You did.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you know, the thing that strikes you first of all about that is if you're holding it, you can't see anything on the display because it's out in front of you.
Yeah.
So effectively, you've got to have somebody stood in front of you working all the buttons. Because there was no step through on that, there was no song things on that. So if you wanted to change patch, you had to know exactly where it was, and that wasn't an easy thing to do.
No.
You know, even on the the DGX, I mean, it was exactly the same. You know, everything's in front of you. Well, I mean, what's the point of that? I mean, the only way to do it is put a mirror in front of you, and that's bloody useless, obviously. So yeah, the user interface for a lot of things, I think, was the last thing that anybody thought of. And, you know,
Yeah.
Alec, did you mention, or did I mention last week about the you know, we were talking about the ergonomics and the neck angle. Did you ever see the original plans for the boss in on the angle of the neck?
You mean the GR77?
No. The SynthAxe, where the neck comes down into the body,
Yeah.
set at that angle. One of the original designs had a large boss on it like that, so the angle of the neck could be turned.
Oh.
Did you ever see that?
Do you know what? I think there was a picture of that. The very first picture I ever saw of the SynthAxe before I knew anything about it. It was a very rough-looking prototype with about a million wires and things, and I think it was on that. So I think I saw a picture in a magazine, and then my wife, because I was fascinated by it, and I probably talked about it, and it was my wife who then spotted that the company were coming to a town near Oxford where I lived. And at that point, I decided I'm going to work there.
I've seen that picture. I use it in my video, so if I can find it, I'll probably put it up here.
Well, it's an interesting one because I never saw it in any publication or anything. But I was going through engineering drawings in the office. I don't know what I was looking for. I was just being nosy or whatever. And there in this drawer was a huge, great engineering drawing of, you know, do you remember we used to call the one in the foyer Frankenstein? The Frankenstein when you walked in. Well, it was just like that, the mock-up, but it had a boss on it like that, which rotated.
And that's because Bill knew that the neck was going to be seriously long if we had the frets spaced widely apart.
Yeah.
And then if it was all in line, you know, you'd need long arms to be able to reach the nut. So they knew it needed to be angled up, but I guess there was a question about how far it should be angled up.
But if you think about, I mean, that might have just happened because of, I don't know, because from one week to another somebody decided to do that. But ergonomically, it actually works because your arm doesn't go straight out like on a telescopic rod, does it? Your arm from the shoulder, it pivots, it rotates. And that makes perfect. If you watch a bass player, you know, bass player will do this sort of thing because that's the way your arm works. It doesn't go out this way, you know. It doesn't sort of shoot out. And of course, the longer your neck is, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
So it made perfect sense to me. Ergonomically, it made perfect sense. And once you realise that everything on it is digital, once you've got that sort of you take your analog brain out and you put a digital brain in, then you've got all sorts of possibilities, you know, like all B strings, or, you know, it doesn't have to be tuned, or, you know, you can do whatever you want with it. And you don't have to have the frets, spaced like a guitar. It all made total sense to me, but it, you know, as we found out as we were going around, I mean, the guitarists that you find to this day, I think, are fairly intransigent. The way they view or don't view change. You know, I mean, I want to sound like Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan, or, you know, I just want a pedal that does that. You know, and the number of times that I've put pedal boards for people, and I want to sound like that. Well, you know, why don't you sort your own sound out, for Christ's sake? You know, because it's. And to this day, everybody's trying to make distortion pedals and various things that sound like they were in the 60s stroke 70s, you know.
That's a good point. I wanted to say that the neck angle feels very comfortable when I'm playing it. It doesn't feel like I'm fighting it. The only thing that's really strange to me is the fact that all the strings are the same. So I have difficulty sometimes. Am I on the D or the G string? That kind of stuff. And even with my right hand, since all the strings are the same, where I am, you know, up and down. I read somewhere that you didn't have to use all the same thickness strings, that you could use like a set of 9s with the wound strings on it.
You
I
can
thought
use
about,
anything.
yeah, I might want to do
Anything
that.
that's conductive. And,
Yeah,
and you're actually making my point there, because what you've just said is I've got my analog head here and I haven't quite taken it all out and put my digital head in. So
well,
if you put your digital head in, you won't have that problem anymore.
no, it's difficult. If I'm playing a chord, I'm just like, I can't feel that my fingers are on the right strings because they're all the same. Instead of like, oh, that's a wound string, but that one's unwound, so that must be D and G.
Yeah.
You know, but I might actually want to do that because it'll actually make sometimes playing chords easier because I can actually feel where they are.
What we should have done on the console was just put switch off your analog head, switch off your digital head now. You know, before you put the power on.
I like the strings all being the same. I don't think you should go back to having different gauges. I think you should
definitely not.
get used to the way it is.
I'm trying. It's just like instinctively, you know, if I want to put my pick on the D string or the G string, it's really just those two. I'm like kind of lost because even when I visually look, it's all the same. It's not like I don't have some indicator that says, oh, that's the D string immediately. And that's all it would be. It has nothing to do with like tension or whatever. It's just knowing where my fingers are in the up and down, you know, especially with the pick because they're not connected. So I'm just like, if I'm actually picking the B string, not the G string, that kind of stuff.
It got me wondering how I do it now because it's never occurred to me to have that problem. And I think it's because I started as a classical player when I was very young. And I think that I rest especially when you're playing electric, you end up muting a lot of strings that you're not playing if you're playing lead. So I think I've got my fingers resting on strings I'm not playing. So I always know where my fingers are and which string I'm picking without having to use any tactile feedback at all. It's funny. I've never had that problem, but it just shows that everybody has, you know, different ways of approaching stuff, you know. Yeah.
And I mean, playing with the fingers is much easier than playing with the pick for me on the SynthAxe for those things. I mean, I'm using the keys, but like, I have a friend of mine now that's like giving me sounds that Alan used. So when I do my lesson videos, I'll have something that's close. So he gave me made me a patch for the lead sound for non-brewed condiment. And he'll do, and on a guitar, it's no problem. But on the SynthAxe, it's weird because I now have to pick and then I'm losing where I am.
Right.
In those strings, so I just have to get used to it. I did want to also circle back for something else that Mal said about the unfortunately what's the word I'm looking for? The fragileness, I guess, of the SynthAxe, you know, and how that's one of the reasons why it kind of, I guess, fell out of favor. Alan also mentioned that because he used it in '86, all through '86 through '89. And basically was like, you know, I love this instrument, but because I have these memory issues and all these things, I can't use it as much as I would like. But also another reason why he stopped using it was the cost of it, because just transporting all of that gear from one gig to another, because basically his sets at the time, from '87 to '89, was about half SynthAxe, half guitar. So it's like you're lugging all of this gear for 4 tunes. And what's even odd about that is that out of those 4 tunes, 2 of them you could have just played on a regular guitar. Like he didn't need the SynthAxe except for the sounds. It wasn't like it had some special ability, like I have to switch from fifths tuning to doing all this kind of stuff. So he would say even just the cost of transporting it was too much, that what they would get paid for the gig wouldn't even cover bringing it. So that was also another reason.
He went out with level 42, and I can't remember what year that was, but he went out with level 42. He borrowed mine for the European leg of that. And he did the whole of that tour with the SynthAxe with level 42. Yeah, I think Alan Murphy was doing the gig. Alan Murphy died, didn't he, in America through the AIDS thing, and. I think Alan Murphy was doing the level 42. I might be wrong there. I can't.
It sounds right.
Remember exactly. Hey?
Sounds
Does that sound right? Yeah.
Well,
Alan Murphy was left a hole with level 42, and Alan stepped into that. It wasn't his sort of gig, to be quite honest with you. And
that was because Gary Husband, I think, was their drummer, and Gary played with Alan forever. I think that was 1990. And there's not a lot of information online about it. There's like one picture I've seen, Alan's wearing a tux and he's playing a Steinberger, but I had no idea that he was using the SynthAxe for that tour.
Yeah, he was using mine.
That must have been the last time, because the last time I know Alan used it for his band was, I think, March of 1990. And I think that the Level 42 tour had to have been after that at some point. But he was using a double neck Steinberger for his gigs at the time. But that makes sense. He wasn't bringing it. It was, well, I'm in England. I might as well use whatever's there.
I mean, at the time, well, I don't know what air freight costs were at the time, but it was massively expensive, massively.
And also this, he's bringing the Oberheim, and he's bringing, the expander and the Matrix 12 and stuff on top of all of that, really just for 4 tunes. And that's why he said, if the thing goes bad, can't play half the set.
That's the Level 40. It's the wrong way around, I know, but that's the Level 42. But there's no year on it, so not that it matters. But
I'm 99.9% sure it's 1990.
Oh, I've got it. Yes, you're right. It's in fact, I've got the ticket.
What's the date?
18th of the 12th, 1990.
Oh, so it's in December.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because Alan went on tour. He did a Pacific Rim tour in May. There's some footage of that, but I don't know what he did afterwards. So that might have been that time he was recording for Level 42 and I guess doing their short tour. Do you remember how long it was? Was it like just a few dates?
No, I mean, I wasn't I was never anarchy about anything like that at all. I just, I had a job to do and I did it. And, it was just what I did. Did you see those pictures, Alec?
Which one?
Well, I was coming back from Oxford and I went past 102B.
Oh, yeah.
And so I stopped and I took a couple of pictures.
My stepson, Ollie, lives in Whitney. And so we're often in Whitney with grandchildren duties. And I stopped by and had a look the other day, and I was quite shocked. The entire building's gone, isn't it?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Did they knock it down, or did they just build round it?
They must have knocked it down, I reckon.
Yeah, because that to me, it's now 3 stories, isn't it? And I can't remember there being 3 stories there.
No, there wasn't. It wasn't.
So that upper floor, they must have knocked it down then.
I was surprised because it didn't feel like it was that old a building, really.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly how I got involved in it. I mean, all my friends lived next door, and next door to SynthAxe was an architect, and they put this plan up. They bought it basically off a carpet manufacturer or carpet seller, and everybody objected to it because there was this rock and roll company coming from London who were going to build a huge factory at the back of their house, which they didn't like the idea of much. So, and that's when Bill Aiken put the PR do on that I attended and didn't put the SynthAxe down. And that's, the story I was telling about when he ripped up my business card.
Yeah. Everybody
came and they all had, Prosecco and nibbles and one thing and another, and they were all pacified. And there's not one of those friends live in that row of houses now, and it's all been developed at the back as well. So it goes. Yeah. In fact, one of the guys was just at my house about half an hour ago, and he'd moved out, went down to Kent, came back again. So it was just one of those things that didn't develop into another commercial building. I mean, once we left, I don't think it did anything, did it?
I never knew. I just went back the other day and I was surprised to see no trace of the place.
Yeah. Did you ever work at New Yacht at the Reflections place there?
No.
You'd long gone by then, hadn't you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Would you like me to just switch the ends of the higher ends of the SynthAxe usage and put it back to where the people on the ground floor actually bought them? I'm just going to show you something here which I think is quite amusing. These are 2 German guys from Dusseldorf, and they played kind of umpire music, and this was from about 1990. But here it comes, fellas.
The guitar duo.
Now, what about that? And they made a lot of. Oh, because that's the wrong. Is that the wrong? Is
It's the right way around. Yeah, we can see it.
You can see. Is it the right way around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I was brought up in Dusseldorf, and the guy on the left there he lived in Dusseldorf, and so I actually took it out and delivered it to him. So on the basis that he would take me around to all my old haunts, which was great fun. But when he played me the music that he was playing, very, very bad versions of Elvis Presley. Trust me, the Germans, they do 3/4 okay, but they can't do 6/8 okay. And they certainly ain't got a feel for rock and roll. I mean, that's probably that's probably a slight on Germans as they are now, because there's some great rock and roll players there now. But they at the time, I was wondering why they would ever want a SynthAxe, and the guy had a studio. He was never going to take it out and play it live. And when I heard what he was playing, I thought, you could save yourself a lot of money by actually not buying this thing. But mine was not to. My job was to sell it, not to persuade him. Anyway, I just thought that was a little diversion, and it wasn't all high-end players that were buying this thing. And there's quite a few people around that have got them. We had a conversation some time ago, John, didn't we, about I had all the sales records.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Because mine, I'd come from. The name is escaping me right now. He was a singer-songwriter. It was Mickey. I had the name, but his claim to fame is Elvis covered one of his tunes, an American trilogy, I believe. Even though those songs are public domain, it's like his medley of them.
You haven't got the Christopher Cross one, have you?
No, because
I lost track of that.
Because the one that I got came from him. The guy that I bought it from, his dad had it, and it was given to him by that guy directly when he passed. It was just weird that he had it, because he's he's in the Nashville Hall of Fame for singer-songwriters, like all this country stuff. Why would he have this, bizarre piece of tech? But apparently he, did dabble in electronic music for a little bit, but I think he was not in he was on hard times, or just, not.
Did you say Mickey somebody?
Yeah, I'm sure I can find it.
It's not that important, but I mean, it was odd going around to various people. Everybody associates. Well, they always ask you who famously played it. Well,
Mickey Newberry was the name.
Hey,
Mickey Newberry.
Mickey Newberry. Does that ring a bell with you, Alec?
Sort of, but I couldn't tell you anything. It does sound familiar.
The stuff that I have is early, like all the PCBs and stuff. So I don't know if he was one of the first people that adapted it. It's like, everything's, all the serial numbers inside are different, but they're all relatively early. I think my console's like 1. I think it's literally like 200/001. So he might have been one of the early people that adapted it.
Well, the thing is that a lot of them. I'm pretty sure that there's 3 of them in with the Michael Jackson estate, because I've spoken with Chris Correll on a few occasions, and who had them, who used them on that tour, and he hasn't got one. And he said no, that all went back to the touring company, and he doesn't know exactly what happened to them or where they are. And I certainly don't. Not that they belong to us; they belong to the Michael Jackson estate. But there's 3 there, because I sold them 3. I had the check from Frank DeLeo in on my desk for a while, just because I couldn't believe it. And those guitars were used all the time by Chris Correll and on that tour non-stop. And where they've ended up, I've no idea. And it's like, I was when I told you about those sales sheets records, there were loads of names on there that you wouldn't know, and I certainly can't remember who they were, simply because there were people buying them. The ones that were sold, and there weren't many, no more than 100, if that. And they were going out to people that like happens a lot. I've sold stuff to people who don't go out gigging and only play in their back garage, or they've made loads and loads of money and they want to set up a studio, so they do, and they want all the best gear. Well, there was some of that going around at the time. I mean, there was I suppose the strangest one was the Sultan of Brunei. Yeah, the Sultan of Brunei. My London dealer was an organisation called Rose Morris, and very, very well known organisation, and they were at the top of Denmark Street, which is a bit like where Sam Ashes and is it 42nd Street, Sam Ashes and Manny's?
Yeah, well, Sam Ash ended up buying Manny's, and that whole Musicians Row, that street is gone now, and Sam Ash moved to, they got rid of all of it. It moved to, I think, 34th Street.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was like that Manny's sort of area, that sort of Denmark Street. It still is, but it's a bit of a facade now because they've overdeveloped it, and where you see the front of the shop, it doesn't go back as far as it used to. So the sellers are still there, but the back end of the shops aren't. Rose Morris was exactly like that. It was quite a huge organisation. Anyway, the SynthAxe featured quite heavily and prominently in the front window of Rose Morris, and there was one in the window and there was one permanently set up, and it was run by a guy called Jed Allen, who is still around in the music business, and I still speak to him on Facebook, but we haven't had a drink together for a long time. But that was a whole setup there where people would see it all the time because Denmark Street, you could drive down it at the time, and it was a through route for the centre of London. Anyway, the Sultan of Brunei was driving past this shop, and he saw this machine there, and he decided right there and then that that's the guitar he wanted for his band. And the Sultan of Brunei has got a huge, great band, and he's got guitarists. And so he went in, he blocked Denmark Street. You can only get one car down there at any one time. He blocked Denmark Street off. Traffic lights turned red, they turned green, they turned red, they turned green. He was there for about 45 minutes, couldn't move the car because he sent his chauffeur in to buy the SynthAxe, and came out with it. Put it in the Rolls Royce, and off he went. Now, you'd think the story ends there. No, it don't. Because, and I'm struggling to find the name of this guy, but there's a huge, great hire company in London called Sensible Music. And I don't think I'm going to remember the name. It's just gone. But the guy from Sensible Music phoned me up and said, and I knew it because I used to use sometimes his studios, his demonstration area, his rehearsal area. There's a demo room, and he said that he still did the SynthAxe. I said yes, yeah. And he said, could I have one at trade? I said, of course, no problem. I mean, you've done loads of deals all over the place. I said, and he was very, very cagey about telling me who it was for. And I think his name was Jeff. That seems to ring a bell. Anyway, I said, well, I said, I've got no interest in taking a deal off you. I mean, I as far as I'm concerned, your deal, I'll send it down. He said, I'll tell you what it's for. He said, it's for the Sultan of Brunei. I said, well, he's already got one. He said, I know. He said, but he's got two bands. I said, what are you talking about? He says he's got two bands, one in the Northern Hemisphere and one in the Southern Hemisphere. and I might have got that wrong. It might have been in the East and one was in the West, but he's got two bands that mirror each other, and he keeps these two did keep these two bands going. So we had one SynthAxe on one part of the world. And what did you know this, Alec? Did I tell you this story?
No. I don't know where I got the story from. I thought it was for his son or daughter or something. I didn't know it was for him.
No, it was for his band. He bought two, and I said to the guy, I said, well, I mean, that's kind of how it rolls. If he's got that much money, and he has, of course, then off you go. And good luck with it. And at least he's not blocking up Denmark Street for a second time.
Should I tell you my Alan story? I
was going to get back to that. Yeah,
did I tell you about the time I upgraded his axe?
I think so. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Oh, we've already covered that. All right.
Well, you told me, but you didn't tell everybody else.
Oh, okay. I couldn't. I knew that we'd mentioned it, but I couldn't remember if it was on the video last time. So one of my jobs was to go out to California and upgrade all of the systems that had been sold when the new transducer board came out. So the first prototypes were sold on the promise that, yeah, we acknowledge that the right hand picking isn't sensitive enough and we're working on it, kind of deal. And so the transducer board was the solution to that problem, but it involved quite a big change to the innards of the instrument. You had to take out the circuit board, put a new one in, and there were a few other changes you had to do at the same time. And so I went over to the States with a whole load of hardware and had the task of ringing round and arranging. That's where that story of Lee Ritner came from. I was upgrading his system. But when it came to doing Alan's, Alan being Alan, of course, he absolutely refused to let the instrument leave his house because he was joined at the hip, So he said, well, can you come and do it here? And I said, well, it's a bit technical. I'll need to sort of bring some gear with me and soldering iron and bits and pieces. I can't remember why I needed soldering iron, but it was a bit of a technical job. And he insisted that I did it at his home. So I went to his home and started to strip the thing down. I did it on his kitchen table. And in the middle of his home life, I think there weren't other people there at the time. I think his kids weren't there and his partner wasn't there. But I hit some problem, or there was something that didn't go smoothly. I can't remember what it was now, but the job took longer than I anticipated. And he was absolutely adamant that I didn't take it away. So I ended up sleeping on his sofa. And it was a fascinating experience. It was surrounded by SG necks and SG parts of SGs. His whole house was full of guitar parts. And he showed me a system that he'd been using that he was really proud of. I wish I could have had a photo or better memories of what it was he showed me. But basically, he had this acetate, like overhead slides used to be in the old days before they had digital stuff. And he had a diagram of a neck of a guitar. And then he had these various acetates that he would lay over it, showing all the notes for all these different scales. And it was highly complex. And he was really proud of it. I think he thought it was a system that maybe you could sell, that, this was a way of helping people to get their head around playing guitar. But it was just so detailed and so complicated, and it was way over my head. And it was just interesting to see. But I got his axe going, and it was fine, and then I left. And then I think I did a few upgrades on that visit, and I was about to come back home, and I had one morning spare, and I'd never been to Disneyland, and I thought, I'll go to Disneyland because my flight is only in the afternoon. And then he called me in my hotel first thing, early in the morning. He said, I've got a problem. I need your help. Can you come over? And I was thinking, I was going to go to Disneyland. Yeah, but I'd rather go see Alan anyway. So it was a bit of a sort of last minute thing. And I went over, and he was really concerned. I mean, he was losing sleep really over this problem. And he said, I've been recording, and he had this big Akai sort of personal studio. It wasn't a DPS 24, but it was like that. And he'd been working on his, I don't know what album it was, but it was his latest, piece of work. And he said, there's a problem, and I can't get rid of it. I can't track it down. I can't figure out what it is. But you can hear it on this recording. I said, okay, so play me it's these clicks. There's like these sudden little clicks in the background, and it's ruining the sound of it. And he played me this recording. I said, I didn't hear them. He said, they're right there. So he wound it back a bit, played it again. It's not tape, but just played the bit again. I said, I still didn't hear it. He said, listen, I'll show you when it is. And then it came up the music. He said, oh, right, okay. I could just about, and I've got good hearing. I'm audibly oriented in the world. I'm not visual. I'm auditory. So I was surprised that he could hear something that I was struggling to hear. But eventually, okay, now I know where it is. I'll listen. Play it again. Yeah, okay. These really, really faint little clicks on the recording. And he was losing sleep over it, but nobody in the world would ever have heard it.
That's keep on going. I'm sorry.
He said it's something to do with the SynthAxe, and I'm thinking, how could it be something to do with it? I'm just kind of interested and puzzled a bit about it. And I think he was using a really fancy Kurzweil piano sound. It was one of the first ones that had kind of different samples for every single note and multiple layers as well. Sounded absolutely gorgeous, but it was a big piece of kit and expensive. And so I spent an hour or two investigating what could be causing these clicks, and we tracked it down in the end. And we tracked it down to the fact that when he was damping the strings, it was let me think, no, I know what it was. It was the MIDI note off was causing the voltage controlled amplifiers on the synth to shut off so quickly that it actually generated an audible click. If it had tailed it off a little bit slower, you would never have heard it. But because it was like a sudden chop at the end of the note, that was what we were hearing. But nobody in the world would have ever heard it. But he was losing sleep over it. Sorry, Mal, what?
So on a Kurzweil.
I think it was a Kurzweil, yeah.
Do you know? Well, I might be able to answer a couple of these things because I'm grinning ear to ear because it made me remember something, but also it's going to lead me to some other questions that I had. Do you know when that was? When you went over there to upgrade it? Was it like 85?
No, it would be later than that. It would have been
85.
80.
I'm just going to change my angle because I'm leaning over.
Right.
I'm not going away. You're not boring me. You're not boring me. I'm just going to change angle.
I think my guess it would have been 87.
Okay. Well, he was using the Kurzweil then, but the reason why I was smiling because I thought it was for something else. On a Tavernchron, which is the first album that uses the SynthAxe, I had posted in the Alan Holdsworth group about something because during the title track, a Tavernchron, during the guitar solos, ba ba ba, there's like this really, really, really high pitched like sound, and it was in pitch with whatever Alan was playing, so it was like 3 octaves higher or 4 octaves higher, but it was almost inaudible. And I sent a message saying like, what's the deal with this? Does anyone else hear this? Like, it seems kind of strange. And I wonder if that was a holdover from that. Alan was using the Kurzweil during Sand because he had mentioned that he just got one.
Sand
But
was already out by the time I was doing this.
Okay, so it was probably for Secrets then. And I think Secrets was recorded, I think sometime in 88. But yeah, Sand might have been recorded but not released yet. That might have been it. But yeah, so I wonder if it had something to do with that because it's only on that track that I've heard, and it's really, really high pitch, and it just seems very out of place.
Right.
So I figured
this was certainly not a tone. It was just a
okay. Oh, all right. Yeah, because I was going to send that to you, say like, oh, was this it? Because that would answer that. But that leads me to two other questions that I had that are probably more of your wheelhouse than Mal's. Was when was the first generation of SynthAxe sort of phased out? The one with the rocking levers and the to the push buttons, and the new ones that were modified.
There was only a handful of those very early ones made, as far as I understand. So they weren't really phased out. It was always there was going to be a more fully functional one delivered.
Because Alan.
So I was aware of two stages of technical changes. The first was what you're talking about, which is that the very first ones that were sold had a whammy. They looked neater on the front. They had no screw heads showing. It was kind of one of the design things was that they didn't want any screw heads. But they also had a wang arm that used to break. It used to break when it got cold in transit in the aircraft. And if people overused them, it would snap easily. It didn't snap where you could see it. It snapped inside. And so that was re-engineered. And then the ones that most people had were ones where you do see the screw heads on the front, and they have a much more robust whammy arm and better sensitivity on the right-hand strings. And then the second upgrade was the transducer board, which is one of the things I was involved in fitting.
Well, that is. I did get involved in going around and just bringing some of those guitars back and then taking the new ones out, because that's. I think at one stage that's how it is happening.
How many do you reckon there were, Mal?
I think I did 5.
Right.
How many did you do?
I don't remember, but I think it was a dozen at the most, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Not
So
sure.
you would have been doing it long before I got there, because I'm pretty sure that the one that I tried at the PR do was one of the old ones, and the one that you did. Oh, I tell you who would know. Nev, wouldn't he? Because Nev did the demo.
Right.
And that was done with and there's another thing. So you remember
Mal's talking about Neville Martin.
Sorry, John. Neville Martin.
I knew.
Yeah, I mean the thing about that studio was there wasn't just an expander there. There was a Matrix 12 in there as well. Do you not remember that, Alec?
Yeah.
There was a Matrix 12.
Yeah.
And I couldn't quite figure out why there was both a Matrix 12 and an expander, but I'm pretty sure that Nev did the demo disc on the Matrix 12.
Yeah.
Crikey, they were all up in my loft. I had thousands of them, and I threw them all away because nobody wanted them. You can guarantee they want them there, ain't you? And all the advertising material that was all up there as well. I didn't get rid of the anything technical, so all the circuit diagrams I've still got.
Yeah, and that's real important, because like when I was watching the thing with the Apollo guidance system, like they could never fix it without, and it's infinitely more complicated without all those circuit diagrams. What everything does and everything.
Well,
it's like valuable to put it out there online. So I was talking to somebody, like, one of the reasons Alan was also, like, I guess not turned off by it, but kind of like more hesitant about using it was, something breaks, I can never get it fixed. Which, if it was 1993, who's going to be able to fix it, because no one had the circuit diagrams or whatever. But now, you could post it online and 1,000 people can, say, oh, you do that. You know what I mean? It's much easier to spread that information out and have everyone kind of figure out what's going on than.
Well, there's a guy in Switzerland. I can't remember the guy that bought it, but there's a guy in Switzerland who collects synths.
I've dealt with him. I can't remember his name, but I know who you mean.
Oh, you did? Was it you that put me onto him? Might have been.
It might have been.
No, it wasn't. No, I've got a feeling there was a connection with Patrick Moraz, the guy that took over the keyboard thinking yes. I think there was something to do with that. Vaguely, I remember it. But he would fix them. He could fix them. He knew his way around it. Yeah, I think there's a couple of people around who've got that sort of ability these days to actually go into it and correct whatever might be wrong. And I'm guessing, batteries got to be a problem in it, Alec.
There's a guy in France who's been quite successful in fixing them as well.
Is that?
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but I could look it up.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned the thing about the battery. I tested my battery; it's still 3.3 volts. And I think it's the old one, yeah. So I might have gotten lucky with that. But yeah, even me looking at the schematics, and I know nothing. I'm starting to understand it a bit. I mean, this might be the only piece of machinery that I actually understand in electronics. But part of it is there is a large community of people that want to preserve old electronics. So a lot of the circuitry inside the SynthAxe is not any different really from, of course, the analog to digital conversions and stuff, but in terms of how the consoles and stuff were, not really that much different than a Commodore 64, or any of the old arcade machines or old pinball machines. So especially you can't emulate, you've got the old Nintendo systems and they still work, but computers nowadays are powerful enough to emulate it, so you can play these old Nintendo games without hooking it up to a TV and all that kind of stuff. But you can't do that with a pinball machine. So people who still want to play those pinball machines from the 70s, they still rely on that old circuitry. So they have to do all that testing for all the chips and stuff like that. So the SynthAxe stuff, that's why it doesn't really worry me so much about once this breaks, it's going to be over with, because that era of technology, people are still interested in replacing Commodore 64s and stuff like that.
And it was like Lego a little bit, in the sense that they were standard chips mostly, and you could work on them yourself with a soldering iron. You could change stuff. You could figure out what was going on. You could get an oscilloscope and see the signals. It wasn't all in silicon, far away. You could get to things.
Yeah. And I think that's people's interest, isn't it? Because if you got a bit of a chance, if you've got a bit of a chance to actually cure something. I mean, I've been working on an old Yamaha FG180 that I picked up for 10 quid at a car boot sale. It's an absolute wreck, but at least I've worked out how to pull it and push it and steam it and do one thing or another. And in 3 weeks, I've got it back to a very playable position, and the sound is glorious. Now, if you that's the analogy to, if you take 20 years. Well, what are we talking about? We're talking about 40 years, 30, 40 years. The same analogy goes back to electronics, where it wasn't that sophisticated in those days. Well, it was when you were doing it, but it certainly ain't now. The sophistications that there are around now, you don't stand a prayer, not a prayer.
Yeah, that's why, Alec, you made a good point that you can sort of get under the hood, why people like working on old cars, because you can get underneath the hood. So, if you got a cell phone now and it goes bad, well, it's just cheaper for the manufacturer to just put another PCB there, and but you can't just say, oh, I'm going to figure out the one thing that's wrong with it and fix it. Whereas the SynthAxe, you kind of can, because nothing's too small, nothing's too archaic. Yeah. And also, I forgot to mention that a lot of the components inside are very similar to synth repair. So that's what I mean. There's a whole world of people out there. There might not be a lot, you just can't go to an electronics shop and say, fix this, but there are hobbyists there that understand this stuff because they want to preserve these, of course you can always just get an Arturia, Matrix 12V VST and play along with it, but it's not going to be the exact same as having a real Matrix 12. So you have to be able to understand how to repair it, and saying there was a guy, I forgot his channel, it was called Synth Chaser, and I was watching a lot of his repair videos, and go, oh, this synth from 1980 uses this weird chip with this weird voltage, but you can buy this thing now that I made as an upgrade, so if it goes bad, you can just put that in there. So there are people that want to move the technology forward, obviously, I mean, they could redesign the whole inside of the SynthAxe by putting like a little, like what they do with the Nintendo's analog. So it needs to be hooked up to an old tube TV. But the problem is if you hook it up to an HD TV for HDMI, it's got to convert the analog to digital, and there's a delay. So when you press the button, your character doesn't respond the same way. So people nowadays are like, well, how do we take that and upgrade it? So what they did was they use like it's an FGPA where they basically emulate the hardware of the Nintendo, but now they put it through an HDMI thing. So now you're playing exactly like with all the flaws that the original Nintendo had, but now moved up to the new modern system, you know, of HDMI. So like someone could look at the inside of the SynthAxe and go like, yeah, well, this is a lot of chips or whatever, but now I can emulate all this stuff on a simpler thing and just replace it, you know?
Who would have known in the 60s that people would revere valve guitar amps, you know? I've got a 64 Vox AC10 behind me, which is my pride and joy, and I've never heard any modern amp get anywhere close to how gorgeous it sounds.
Yeah, and you know, you want to.
I've got a 1973 twin reverb sitting down there, and I got pissed off for carrying that about, and that I bought that on a German tour in Germany when we were doing US bases, USAF bases, and it doesn't owe me a penny. It really doesn't owe me a penny. And I've got a guy called Dan Coggins who loves working on it. He just loves analog stuff. Do you remember a pedal called Love Tone?
Rings a bell, but I don't think I ever played one.
Well, Dan Coggins was the inventor of Love Tone, and I've got his latest thing just down here that he kind of he got ripped off by his partner, and you can leave that in there because he really pisses him off. But down there is his pedal. He can't even use the name Love Tone, but down there is a pedal that he's reinvented from all those old and it's handled, you know, it's the old technology, you know, and Dan can just fix anything, but he doesn't like working on modern digital stuff. And I can sort of see where he's coming from, because I do have an old car. I've got a 1967 Sunbeam Alpine, and I can go out there and I get a lot of pleasure in just messing about with it because I know how to fix it. Because I started off life as an engineer, but I wouldn't know how the hell to. I've got a Citroen out there. I open the bonnet, and it's just a whole sheet of plastic. I have no idea what to do with it. Not a clue. You know, you've got to plug it into a computer. Well, I don't like that. I love my twin Webers, my DCOs, and my, you know, farting and banging and sucking and blowing and all the sort of things that go with a really old car, you know. And yeah, I can see where these guys are coming from. Totally.
But isn't it weird though that we're having this conversation now, and back in the 80s, the SynthAxe was, even to us, it felt like it had come from space.
God, it was a different world, man.
And now we're talking about it as old tech, you know.
Exactly. Look, I mean, you know, you can bear me out on this. You taught me a lot about computers, Alec. I mean, I don't know whether you realise that I knew nothing. I absolutely knew nothing about computers. And I don't know whether you remember this, but I can remember coming home on one occasion and saying to my wife, I've just spent 2 hours with this bloke. I have not got a clue what he's talking about. And that was you.
Well, I got to tell you that there was a time, I would say it was about 82, 83, when I built my first computer using a soldering iron, because you couldn't buy any. There weren't any. It was long before the IBM PC came out. And there was a time when I could understand everything that went on inside the computer. And if anything went wrong, I could fix it. I could, because the software was simple enough to track down bugs and problems and interrupts and stuff. And the hardware was like Lego, you know, you could trace it, you could fix it. And I can remember feeling really confident with computers, because if you did your job right as a programmer, it would work. There was nothing else going on. It was like a very simple inputs, do the software, outputs.
Yeah.
It's not like that anymore. I blame Bill Gates mostly.
But that's why, like, I think a lot of people like the analog electronic stuff, because I guess there's just something to it there. You can really get in and modify things, where digital is like easier for me because I know so little about it. It's like it's a logic gate. It either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't work, you just replace it. So it's at times easier to understand, but sometimes slippery more to kind of figure out the problem. Like I was saying with the foot pedal, the foot switch that I have, it can go backwards, but when you go forwards, it gets stuck on. So I traced with the oscilloscope, like where it sort of converges, where, okay, this works. And then it got to a chip where, the minus sign worked, but the plus part stayed on. Oh, okay, so I'll replace that chip. I replaced it, didn't work. And I went, oh, that's because it needs to be cleared. And that clear gets sent to this chip. So I'll replace that chip. And it still didn't work. And it's like, okay, well, that gets sent to this thing. It has to be this chip. And I replaced that chip and it still didn't work. Yeah. So
there's a slightly funny story about the pedals and the polarities, because working through from the foot switches in the pedal unit and then through the cables to the actual, I'm trying to think, does it go to, it goes to the console, doesn't it? But there's about 6 different places where you can change the polarity of whether it's kind of make or break, because they weren't sure when they were designing it which way it was going to end up being with the switches and stuff. So they put links in so that you could have the option to change it if the design changed. But there's like about 6 of them. So if you ever change it, you can be completely confused. And I'm now wondering whether some old ghost from the 80s has come back to haunt your system.
Well, I mean, I'll fit, because the thing is that the light also stays on, and the light is tied to when you press the plus, instead of it going high and then low, it just stays high. So maybe it's some capacitor that's not discharging properly or something. I just, in my ignorance, like, oh, it'd just be simple that it's that chip and I just replace it. But the thing is, even though it's tricky to find the exact fault, it's relatively easy to replace. Oh, it's just that one capacitor and you put it in, you're done. Or it's that one chip and it's done. But I think most people like working with analog stuff because it might be easier to track where the issue is, because things don't really read right. Like with the chip, the whole, like, you can have 4, OR gates and 3 of them work and the one doesn't, and you have to figure, oh, that one doesn't work. It's just trickier to find some of those faults. Whereas the analog stuff, it's like you can almost, especially with like amp stuff, you can hear what it's doing. I'm going to add more voltage here, or whatever it may be, or add this capacity.
You can board level track it. If you've got the circuit diagram, and I mean, resistors and capacity. Look, this is see if you know what these are. All you guitarists out there, what are they from?
Yeah, slides, aren't they?
They're like old caps.
Eh?
They're like old film capacitors.
Oh, yeah.
Fender twin reverb capacitors.
Oh, right.
And they were all replaced by Dan Coggins with things like that.
Yeah.
And in fact, probably smaller. And that was he basically replaced. He said they were working. He said, but they won't be forever, and they won't last forever. But once as long as you know what you're doing in there, so that's been revalved. It's been, capacitors. I mean, that's the size of a massive, great circuit board that you could send to the bloody moon. One of them, I mean, and that's probably just filled with chalk and paper. That's all that is.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that technology has come so much further that you can replace that older tech with much smaller stuff that's less susceptible to failure, because it's just made better.
Yeah, if it does go, it goes. And
oh yeah,
you've got the only way of replace a chip.
Yeah, and
I know Alex said trying to stop me doing this. I'm going to go and see if I can find that chip very, very quickly, because it's just in the other end of the office. Just bear with me.
Okay, well, I can ask him something.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Well, this works perfectly into what my next question that I want to ask, which is again more in your wheelhouse, was see the only thing that's really annoying about trying to test the SynthAxe is you have to hook everything up. So it's intelligently designed where you only have one, you have the floor unit that has the power supply that powers everything else. So you don't need four, outlets for everything. But the problem is it all has to be sort of connected together to talk to each other. So when I have to, try to fix the pedal to say, oh, is it getting this or that? I have to hook up.
This is why I'm saying I had to clear my kitchen for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I wanted to ask was, at the SynthAxe company, how did you guys test them out? Did you have special software? Did you have special things to connect?
Yeah, we did. We actually used to use a computer you probably won't be familiar with in the States, but it was called the BBC Micro. And it was, I think it was a 6502 microprocessor. What was it like? It was an early 8-bit computer, basically. And we had test rigs that were made up that you could connect boards to. And we had test programs on these little BBC Micro computers that would exercise various things. And I remember actually I built quite a fancy cable tester that would test any of the cables. It was a software-based machine that would scan all of the connections in anything you plugged it into, and it would tell you what was connected to what and if there are any shorts or not. Any open circuits. But because it would learn a cable, you could say, right, this is a good cable, learn that. Then you could plug anything into it at all, whether it was ribbon cables or coaxial cables or, the fancy LEMO connectors that the Axe used. And you could therefore put any cable on test and then wiggle it and see if there was any intermittent problems with it. So we had quite a lot of specialized test gear that was developed by the guys who developed the SynthAxe themselves. So we're talking Mike Dixon and Tony Sedley mostly.
Because it's relatively simple, but it's like in order to use the console, I have to connect it to the SynthAxe and the foot switch and put it in. And it's like if I just had a way to just give the console power to check certain things, it would be much quicker to do. So while we're still on a topic with some of like the tech of the SynthAxe, are there any other information on the design features of it that you might remember? I know you talked about the neck, but anything else sort of specific that jumps out? Again, if there's nothing, not a big deal.
Are you asking me?
Anybody?
Well, I mean, I can't remember anything to do with the design at all because I wasn't there. And it's not so much I don't remember it. I just don't know. The only thing I ever got involved in, I think.
I'll tell you one thing that I thought that stuck with me that was quite clever. You know that you can bend strings independently and it accurately changes the pitch depending on what you've got set up on the console. So you can have typically, like 2 or 3 tone bend, but if you want to go silly, you can have a 2-octave bend. But what's interesting is the way that they implemented that is using some little about 1 centimeter diameter coils, 6 of them, 1 under each string, and they're positioned close to where the neck meets the body. And they're very fragile because they use very, very fine wire, and they did used to break occasionally. So you could lose the string bend on 1 string. And it was a bit of a fiddle to repair because if you weren't very careful when you changed the string bend coil, you might end up damaging one of the ones next to it. So you'd fix the problem, but you'd have a new problem. And what I thought was clever was that when you look at how a string is deflected laterally when you bend it, obviously further up the neck your hand is,
they're all different angles.
Yeah, you're going to get a much, that coil is going to see a much bigger lateral displacement when your finger is close to it than when it's down at the far end of the neck.
Wasn't that corrected in the software? Then?
Yeah, there was a lookup table that said, okay, if you're bending it on fret 1 or fret 2, we need to apply this much pitch change. But if you're bending it and you're getting the same displacement laterally, but you're on fret 24, then it's a much smaller pitch bend that we need to apply. And that was all corrected in software, which was kind of insane, really. but it worked.
That was, I think that might have been Tony Silloway, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Who did that? Very, very, very clever stuff.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was saying that just makes a lot of sense. Like I never thought about it, but it's absolutely true. And then trying to find a way to implement that.
Well, there were various little innovations. I mean, the one that used to I used to spend a lot of time was the left and right hand coordination, where not a single guitarist that you ever meet will admit to plucking before they fret or fretting before they pluck, but we all do. And to try and analyze that and to try and explain it to somebody who might be at the top of their career and a lot further up the food chain than you are, was never a very pleasant experience. But I think Alec mentioned it before about Alan's wonderful comment about this thing. It issues spurious notes, and Alan's comment was, "Don't bloody play them, then," And
getting the sensitivity right was quite a tricky thing as well. If you had it at its most responsive, it would pick up everything you did, and quite often pick up things that you didn't mean to do.
Yeah.
And you could dial that down so it took longer. You had to have your finger at rest for maybe a millisecond or two longer before it kind of was definitely sure where your finger was. But that, if you went overboard with that, it would make it too sluggish and it wouldn't be responsive. So you had to dial a bit of a compromise between how rapidly the neck would respond to what you were doing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've learned myself, like trying to, that's like, once I get that set, I'm good for everything. But I think that's also indicative to the patch that you're using. If you're using a patch with a very slow attack, then those notes, you're not really playing that much and they'll go away. But if you're using something like an electric piano DX7 sound, you gotta find the right balance for it. So,
this is something that used to happen with the Roland systems early on. Was that you could get a very, very bright piano sound, and it'd be sounding really great on a top E, above the 12th fret. But you play it on a bottom E at the first fret, you haven't got anywhere near the same response, because it works on an analog system, and it's got to go through 1.5 cycles, etc., etc. And the way that a lot of people used to get around this was to or one of the ways you could get around it, a bit extreme, was actually to get a guitar that you only ever use for guitar synthesis and just put all Bs on it and tune them all to B. And you don't get the guitar to play anything. You get the synth to play the noise. So the sounds come out of the synth and you tune the synth. So, you obviously got to have mono synth, but, effectively that's what you're doing. You're getting the attack on the bottom E, the same as it would be above the 12th fret on the top E, because it's working on exactly the same frequency. So, and the other way of doing that on as we used to call it, pitch to glitch.
Yeah, I was going to say derogatory term, pitch to glitch.
was to just get the guitar sound at a fairly high level of attack, because that on the bottom E, it's going to take a while for a slow string sound attack to come in. And that was that. I mean, I know for a fact that people did that on some demos.
Mal, have you ever seen what Rob O'Reilly's doing in Ireland with his MIDI?
Well, no, we had this conversation about a year or two ago, and we discussed it, and I think we were trying to get in touch, weren't we, and do something with it. But no, I don't know what's happening.
I had a couple of conversations with the guy. I was blown away with what he's done. I've never got my hands on his MIDI guitar.
But what's did he actually? Is it being marketed or not?
Yeah, it's in production. Yeah, and as far as I can tell, having talked at some length with him, he's actually solved pretty much all of the problems that the SynthAxe solved. In a MIDI guitar that's current. So if I was ever going to go down that line again, I wouldn't go back to an old SynthAxe. I'd look at Rob O'Reilly's guitar.
Well, that's what I tried a converted I think it was Korg in Harrods actually. It was an exhibition of Rory Gallagher's guitars. His brother had put the whole collection together and created a bit of a museum in Harrods in South Kensington. And we've stopped.
No, I'm just sharing your screen.
That's it. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. You should really have a look if anyone's interested in modern
stop
day.
there. Stop at the headstop. Oh, right. Okay.
See, I was going to actually. This was one of the questions. I think.
Can you see? Look, there's the display.
Yeah.
He's cured that problem of step where you don't have to lean around the guitar because it's actually on the top there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone actually wanted me to ask this question if there's any other like MIDI stuff that you would like recommend. That's
Well, I haven't played one, so it's based on conversations and stuff I've had. But I did talk to him at length. And he's got some very clever people. He's got one guy who's a bit of a genius, I think, working on. And he was talking about all of the problems that we've talked about with damping strings and bending strings and all of that kind of stuff. And I
pull off to open.
Say again, Mal?
Pull off to open.
I think so. I could be wrong, but I was blown away with what he's managed to do. So yeah, I think it would be. But he had a back. He had such a long waiting list for them. It was like a 18-month waiting list to get your hands on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's why he was going to lend me one so I could check it out, but they were in such demand that I couldn't get to the top of the queue.
See, the problem is for me, like that MIDI unit looks great, but that's more for a guitar player, kind of not what the SynthAxe was for, but that would, if anything, be more successful because someone could pick it up and be able to play it like a guitar. See, like that wouldn't be exciting for me, not because it's a badly made instrument, it's because it has certain features that the SynthAxe had that this one doesn't. And I always say, like, if someone wants to redo the SynthAxe, the three things that they would really need to do to make it do what it, what the SynthAxe is only has, like any of the other MIDI guitars or controllers don't really have, is maybe four things. The frets being the same distance apart. Yeah. That's important for me because it allows you to play things that like how am I going to play this certain chord on a guitar neck because the frets get smaller, your can't reach. Turning left hand dampening off is a big one where I can just play a chord and then just let it ring out and play something on top of it, or I can play a really wide chord or blend chords together that are impossible.
Yeah, I love the idea that you can play one note on this string, then another note on this, and then and you can play a chord that you could never possibly span with.
The other one is obviously
just tuning the top two and the bottom two strings, an octave down and an octave up. I mean, that's just you can't do that on a piano.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I don't think that guitar.
You're gonna have to do that. Yeah,
I don't think on that guitar you're locked to standard tuning. You can't just go, I'm going to hold this chord and now I'm switching to fifth tuning.
I think you can do that on Rob's guitar.
Oh, you can. Okay,
yeah. It's not a pitch to voltage. It's not a pitch to MIDI.
Okay, all right. So
it's a scanned neck like the SynthAxe.
Oh, okay, all right. So that's one. And what would be the other one that the synth? Oh, and the keys.
He's got keys. He's got keys on it.
Oh yeah, I didn't see him.
No, you can't see him on that image, but he definitely has pads.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I remember talking to him about the layout of it because I think he was going to have them in a row, and it's a couple of years ago, and I can't remember the details, but he's certainly got pads that you can. They're much smaller than the SynthAxe, and they're just on the scratch plate, but you can certainly play it without plucking strings.
So with all the things you tell me, can it also turn that left hand dampening feature off? Does it have something similar to that?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So
could you send me those images, Alec, please?
Say again?
Could you send me those images?
All he needs just Google Rob O'Reilly guitars. You'll find it. Rob O'Reilly MIDI guitars.
Rob O'Reilly. All right. If I forget that, I'll find it.
Yeah.
So that solves at least a couple of them. So that's pretty good.
They're not cheap.
The only thing we haven't sort of. Do you know a guy called Bela Fleck?
Yeah.
Well, he had a percussionist who used a SynthAxe.
Yeah. It's one of the Wooten brothers, Future
Yeah, I was
Man.
going to say it's Victor Wooten or something is associated with that.
Electro Man, did he call himself? Or
He's got it's all mashed up and
yeah,
painted, and
he's put a Yamaha keyboard on there and everything.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you know,
I've seen it.
sorry, I'm going back to a conversation that we were talking about earlier on about people fixing things and changing things around, you know, and he's done exactly that. You know, he's taken a SynthAxe, and again, I don't know which one it is, and I would have done it if I'd have been able to find those.
I heard it was Lee Ritner's.
Lee Ritner's.
I heard
really?
it was his, but I'm not sure because it doesn't look, unless he painted it or whatever. But that's where I heard that it came from. That it actually is his.
Don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I've got a picture of Lee's here, which is the only. It is the only black one. There it is.
Yeah, I think we saw that last. Yeah, I think you showed that last time. Yeah.
Oh, I showed you it last time.
Yeah, but I think when he did a DVD, it actually might have been. I think it came out actually before even any of Alan's stuff. But I think the one that he had was blue. Did he have two, or did he just get a different one?
Lee Ritner?
Yeah.
Don't know. I thought he only had one.
Okay. Yeah. When there it is.
There you go.
He has a different one because look, if you
Future Man, that was it.
Yeah, but if you look at it, he has the second gen one because it's got the buttons instead of the rocking arm. That's why Lee's had the rocking arm. So that's why I said.
Yeah.
But this is what I also wanted to ask about that the first and second. I call them the first and second gen just to to make sense to me, because Alan, I guess when he first tried it out in the Winter NAMM show, I guess he had ordered one like immediately because he tested it out at Oberheim and whatever, and then used it all through 85, getting comfortable with it and doing whatever. And then he first uses it live in February of 86 for like a little tour that he did. And then a couple of months later, he now has a gray one. That's the second gen one with the buttons.
I took that to him in Frankfurt.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, there was the first graphite one that we did, I think.
Oh yeah, okay. See, that's another good piece of information. I actually know the guy that has it now. I think his name's Andre Caparazzo. Because he posted a picture and it's got Alan's flight cases and everything with it. But it was there a thing like if you had that first gen, you could swap it for the newer one.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
well, that was the deal. In order to get the cash flow coming in, the deal was this isn't the ultimate version, but if you take it now, we will swap that out. And that's what that Alec was involved in 12. I was involved in about 5, I think.
So you were involved in swapping them. Not, I thought you meant replacing the transducer board. You meant actually.
The job I was talking about was the upgrade. That was the second stage. That was when it was the second.
Actually swapped the guitars out.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I'm right in saying that a lot of those old ones were still in SynthAxe in stock, and I've got a feeling that Ian Hitkin started selling them off with the upgrade. I know. Well, you know better than me, mate. I mean,
the only reason why I asked if they were swapped is because even though they looked almost identical, the rocker arm button by the trigger strings is in a different place. Yeah. So if it's in a different place, that means that the thing, it's not like, oh, we're just going to change the actual switch to buttons. It would be placed differently on the PCB and on the fiberglass. You know what I mean? It wasn't like they're modified.
There was a short cable.
I've got both versions here. I'll have a quick look. I'm not going to drag them out, but I'll have a quick look.
I saw the one. There's one guy that has him. He goes by like Steve Powell. He actually has one with the first gen one.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, that's what he uses with the rocker arm. I don't know if he bought it when it was new. If that was his he got it in 85 and just never upgraded them, or if he got it from somebody afterwards. But I see videos of him playing it, and he has that first gen, and that's why I think his is like champagne colored. It's not. It's not red. It's like a different. It's like a almost like a shell pink.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that last time. There you go.
Oh, yeah, you got two. Should I get mine? Should I take mine out?
This is going to be interesting, Mark.
Oh, bloody hell, they're so heavy.
Right.
Which one is this?
So old one.
On the
They've
left.
both got no.
This is the
Oh,
old
he's
one.
got the screws. No, but he got the screws on that one.
Yeah,
He got some weird hybrid one.
that's weird, Mal. Because I was saying that the first one that was ever made didn't have any screws visible on the front.
Yeah, and that's the normal one. Well, the more popular one.
Yeah, because those little switches, they don't move very much. Whereas, as you say, the very first one on the prototypes, it's like a rocker that moves much more.
Yeah. And I mean, there were other small differences because I put this in the Alec video. Yeah.
Show us the same close up on the other one, Mal.
Yeah, just hang on.
Also, the headstock got designed. I think the original headstocks, the logo was molded in the plastic.
Right, that's true. That's true.
And
yeah. Then they added these badges, and we used to give these away at trade shows. So
yeah, we did.
They've got a little clip on the back so you can wear it.
Yeah, you see where the rocker arm is? How much further it is to the front? That's not in the middle.
So
The bottom one, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So Mal also gave me the one of those things for I was able to put on the headstock. So I was cleaning it and I took some of the paint off. And I was like, oh, that was kind of dumb. I just went and bought chrome paint because I figured that I looked at it, I'm like, oh, these are painted on. I just bought a chrome paint mirror pen and just filled it in.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, I can send you another one. I think I can send you. I keep saying this, I've got that, and it would appear I haven't got very much at all, really.
I'm just going to load up on everything you got. So still talking about the way that it was designed, and sort of more of like Alec when you were sort of having to demo them. Were there any like things, any flaws that you kind of had to hide that you knew about that you didn't?
It's not a flaw that you had to hide, but it was a flaw that often surfaced in production and testing. And that was that if you hammered on over 3 or 4 frets and you had like a percussive sound, like a glockenspiel or a clarinet or something that was, you're going to hear the note if it gets triggered at all. If you hammered on over 3 or 4 frets, it was really hard to make it so that you didn't hear any of the notes between those frets. And one of the test procedures that we had to do was to do hammer-ons all on every string, on every position of the neck. And sometimes, if the frets weren't exactly at the height they needed to be, you could pick up an intermediate note. And it was really annoying because instead of going da-da, it would go da-da-da, da-da-da, you get this little note in the middle. And if that happened, we had to send it back, and they would. At the time, it was Neville, I think, who'd got experience working at the Fender custom shop, who would hand stone the frets to make them not have a high point. And if you got it right, you could hammer on, and you wouldn't get any intermediate notes. But during production, it was very frequent that we'd test a neck and go, nah, it's no good.
And is that with the default sensitivity, because you could just set the sensitivity a little bit high?
No, yeah, there were compromises. It had, you couldn't ever you couldn't expect to set it to the highest sensitivity and never get any intermediate notes. So it was a compromise, but it was pretty clear whether it was playable or not. But one of the things that we did often fail them for was that kind of fault. And then they'd go back and they'd have to be stripped. Well, they'd be stoned, and then while stoning, sometimes it would damage the connection or the solder joint or something, and then you'd end up, what was one problem turns into 2 problems, and it takes a whole week to get the neck working or something crazy. I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say that was one of the biggest problems, was getting the necks to be reliably quality. That the tolerances required were far higher than what you need on an electric guitar.
Mm. When I got mine, I tried every note out. I remember it worked fine, but then somehow, I don't know, maybe a few weeks later, when I got to the low E string, the 23rd fret was triggering the 24th fret.
Right.
something like that. But it was only those two notes, and I couldn't figure out why. So all I did was I took the bridge and I just raised it. I just shimmed it like a hair, and it went away. I was like, all right, that's fine with me.
That's the kind of thing. The other thing that would happen sometimes is that each fret was made of 6 individual pieces of metal, and there were tiny gaps between those 6 pieces, but angled so that you could bend a string and it wouldn't catch on them. But if those 2 pieces of metal happened, if they weren't perfectly aligned and they touched, you'd end up with a short. But it wouldn't stop it playing. But what would happen if you hammered on one string, the other string would hammer on because they were connected together. So that was a fault that we would see in production, but we wouldn't allow them out with that fault.
Yeah, and I had talked to you about that issue, and then I went and I did a continuity test, and it didn't trigger.
Right.
So that wasn't the issue. But what I did find out, again, it's like learning how to play the SynthAxe instead of playing it like a guitar, was how I was playing it. I was playing these certain chords one way, with my finger, but I realized just by accident, if I like barred the entire neck, then it went away.
All right.
So I was like, okay, I don't know what's causing it, but I'll just know when I play this part instead of barring, because it was, I was trying to play a chord on the 5th fret, so on the A string it'd be like 5, 8, 5, 6 or something. So I was only really concentrating on that between the A and the B string. But if I bar the low E and the high E and just use my, just trigger the same string, then it just went away. I was like, okay, well, I'm not complaining, but just one of those things that but actually one of the things that was interesting about playing the SynthAxe is I was getting those weird notes, and I was like, why is it I'm getting these weird notes? It's triggering I'm barring it, and it's triggering the fret behind it, not the fret in front of it. And I was realizing it was because it was like the way that my finger was barring on a regular guitar, it's fine, but on the SynthAxe, if I was like, if this is the fret, and this is the fret that I want to trigger, if I'm back here, it's triggering this fret. I have to be closer to that fret. Yeah. And what I was realizing was my finger wasn't straight always in the fret. So I had to be very conscientious of, okay, when I get to this part, keep my finger perfectly parallel to the fret across the strings.
And guitar players hate that.
Well, it's not an issue to me. It's, again, trying to transfer what I know works on a guitar to the SynthAxe. And it's like, no, you have to keep your finger perfectly straight. And, of course, once you get comfortable with that, it's just going to make your regular guitar playing better. Because it's not going to make you a better player.
It makes you a better player because you've got to be more mindful about what you're doing.
Yeah, so that's why I had brought up last time, I wondered by playing the SynthAxe if Alan's, his left hand technique got better in terms of his rhythm, because if you're using a patch that's kind of percussive and your fingers are slightly out of time, it's going to be very obvious that you're going like but instead of da-da-na-na-na-na-na. So I wonder if by playing it so much you end up getting better control of your left hand, which ultimately is just going to transfer to a regular guitar. You just end up better that way.
I would think so. But as I said last time, he wasn't human. So.
One of the things that Mal just said, which was new to me, was having the neck angle being able to be moved a little bit. Was there anything that was supposed to be added, or was they wanted to add, but either they couldn't because of the cost or the technology available?
I think by the time I got involved in it, certainly anything was possible, of course, but the money constraints were such that the R&D had stopped. Let's just get the product out. And
I think that the last changes that I was aware of were software changes to the console. So there were things, I can't remember the details, but there was a special version made that I think the idea was it was going to become standard production, but I think it was done originally for Michael Berardi. And it was something to do with splitting the neck into zones so that you could have
Michael Berardi, he did.
Stuff below the capo position, wherever you programmed it, would play on different channels to what was above the capo position. So effectively, you've got 2 shorter necks. So you could play a different synth on the lower part of the neck and a different synth.
Well, it was just like splitting a keyboard on a proper keyboard.
Yeah, but it wasn't done by note. It had to be done by string. So it was a little bit complex. But
and That's it's a really cool idea, but nothing physical, nothing like, oh, we want to be able to integrate. I can't think of anything, but anything that was just an idea that was thrown out there that never really came to fruition for any reason.
No, I think that the last sort of major thing was Alan adding the breath control, really. He sort of made a lot of use of that, and
well, that was analog. Actually, I think the way that he used that was he took the velocity of the SynthAxe and put it all the way up, because he had mentioned that he couldn't record direct MIDI with the breath controller. He was using it in an analog way.
Pretty sure you're right. Yeah, because he used it at one of the Chicago demos. He used it.
Yeah, and he when he got the graphite SynthAxe, that's when he started using the breath controller, and that was April of '86. And it was like a Steiner's Krumar Master Touch. And when you were showing me those, the pictures of the Chicago '86 thing, I'm sure he was already, well set up with all that stuff.
I wasn't aware of any new features that were hoped for. I mean, there may well have been. I wasn't in the development team, So.
Because I'm pretty sure they hit all the things that they wanted to hit. Like, oh, we wanted to be able to do X, Y, and Z. If anything in the future, like, oh, you know what? It'd be nice if we can add this, or we're having this issue. If there's a way to in order to fix it, we'd have to reinvent the wheel, and you can't go back and use it.
I think it was done and finished to optimize everything that Bill's vision was. And I didn't know the man I didn't know the man at all, actually, but he had vision. He certainly had vision, and he had drive, and he had the ability to get people together to get that machine out there and finished. And I think he achieved it personally. I mean, to this day, I still think it's the best thing out there. Although I've not seen the Irish guy's machine.
Yeah.
In let's face it, 1986, there was nothing around like it at all. The step didn't come anywhere close.
Yeah.
And so from sort of 86 to 92, and had we not had the various financial crises, and had we not had the demise, not so much the demise, but the introduction of the Ataris and one thing another, where the studios that I was trying to put things into were falling out of bed left, right, and centre. I think it would have been a lot more successful than it actually was. I mean, it had production flaws. It didn't have flaws in the operation. I mean, the thing works perfectly okay when it's working. I mean, reliability, yeah, quite. But but if you got that thing produced in China, and let's face it, China's got sort of 20% failure rates of anything they produce, but they produce in such quantity that's acceptable. Had we had that, we would have been down below $1,000, I think, in a very short space of time. It was just one of those commercial things that I think was unfortunate, because I think the product was absolutely phenomenal, and the drive behind it was phenomenal. And I mean, Branson, of all people, was the best person in the world to actually get behind that, because he was innovative. He still is innovative. He's got an entrepreneurial spirit that is just beyond anybody on the planet. And
his parties were quite good as well, weren't they?
Yes, that as well. Yeah, almost sure. One thing almost anything I ever did with SynthAxe always seemed to be a party. I don't know. I can remember all sorts of things, which probably aren't right for this video, but in fact, they certainly aren't, because I probably not only incriminate myself, but incriminate all sorts
I remember one summer Virgin party. They had helicopter rides, which was a big deal in the mid-80s. You know, it wasn't a commonplace. They had a fruit stall from Covent Garden with just the most glorious. I mean, who eats fruit? But it was just like luxury beyond your wildest dreams. They had Cutting Crew playing live, which I remember that. Nearly Died in Your Arms Tonight. They were a great band. And then the only person to go swimming in the lake of the garden, of course, was Branson himself.
Well, I think the 80s, I mean, you know, I grew up in the 60s, which was pretty wild anyway, with some of the best music in the world, and still to this day known to mankind. And I watched it in pubs, and then to end up in the 80s where I did, where there was a lot of money sloshing about, and it was great fun. I mean, it really, really was great fun around here anyway, and the businesses that were going on, and the SynthAxe thing that was going on, and just to turn up in Munich and end up in some party in some Bavarian beer cellar being paid for. I mean, I don't even believe I was there, to be quite honest with you. I mean,
you've got your book of all those memories.
Well, yeah, but I'm thinking to myself, well, I did this and I did that. Was that really happening? Because that sort of thing doesn't happen now. You don't go on live TV. I mean, I remember one instance with Womack and Womack, and who was playing the SynthAxe? Danny McIntosh, who eventually ended up marrying Kate Bush. And this program was called Own a Filter, and I was off stage operating the console of the SynthAxe. Danny was on stage operating the SynthAxe with Womack and Womack, and there were some pretty prestigious players on there. Stuart Elliott was on drums. I remember that. And they'd been rehearsing this particular number in a particular key in the afternoon, and this thing went out, and the filter went out. Michael Poe was the producer then. And this thing went out, and I was just on the side of the stage watching this thing, thinking, okay, this is just going to go really well, be great promotion for the SynthAxe. And it kicked off, and Womack started off in a different key than they'd rehearsed it in the afternoon. And I've got a video of it, and bearing in mind the camera's out front, the video is out the front. I'm on the side of the stage. And all you can see is Danny Mac going, "It's fucking D minor," and everybody changed, because they were European pro session guys, and they'd just gone into the completely different key. I mean, but great once everybody got. But this was live TV. This was live TV. And on the same show was Johnny Mac and Jonas Hellborg. You remember Jonas Hellborg?
Oh, yeah. I know them.
Bass player with Johnny Mac for a while. And they did a duo thing. Randy Crawford was on there. And, I mean, the party in the evening was unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And, I mean, to this day, I can't believe I was there. I mean, I just...
What was the name of the show again, Mal?
Owner Filter, Without Filter. It's where I'm pretty sure it's where it's spelled it's spelled OHNE. It's a German program. Yeah. It was done in Baden-Baden. Westdeutscher Rundfunk was the it's Süddeutscher Rundfunk. Just tap it in, you'll find it. Owner OHNE, Owner Filter. And if you can pull it up, pull it up, and I'd love to see it.
I've got loads of them on YouTube. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
My left shoulder features in it, I think. So, hey.
So Womack and Womack,
Hey?
Womack and Womack is the one. Oh yeah, here you go. I've got it here. 19.
Oh, it's on.
Got it?
Yeah.
No shit. You got it?
Yeah. I'll just.
Well, you can put it in here. You can share the screen. I don't have to even do anything.
Oh, that's magic.
Thank God for YouTube, my favorite.
I've got
This is amazing. What year was it, Alec? Because
86. It says.
Hey, does it say what year it is? Oh, there you go. Come on now.
They're in wrong key.
Oh, there's Danny on the right. Look, there's SynthAxe on the right. And there's my left shoulder. There's Danny.
We got trouble on both sides. F-A-M-I-L-Y. Good and bad times on both sides. My family. Yeah, I'm talking about that you and me. Yeah, I'm talking about this family.
Can't hear the accent.
Oh, Johnny.
That all is life is sad and
I'm going to pause it because I don't think you can talk while we're doing the same. That's
Oh, that's
interesting.
magic. Yeah.
If you Google owner filter Womack, that's what I did in YouTube. If not
And
Google
it comes up.
Go
Oh,
to
well
YouTube and
done.
do it.
That's brilliant. I'm so pleased.
I couldn't hear the axe though myself. Could you?
What?
I couldn't hear the SynthAxe. I couldn't pick it out.
Oh, well, for Christ's sake. How do you know? That's what we were saying before. How do you know?
Oh, that's great.
I'm so glad my left shoulder's become famous. I didn't realize I've been on YouTube before.
Something a random fact that might be common knowledge, but I didn't know it. Something Alan told me when I was working on his kitchen table is that Pudwood was the name of his daughter. It was the
Sorry, say that again.
Pudwood was the name of his daughter, the family name.
Oh.
Yeah, it's Emily. Yeah, he had a nickname for all of them. And that's one of the tunes that he used the SynthAxe for.
Yeah.
He played like all the time. And that's why it's weird because that tune is all in standard. So eventually when he stopped using the SynthAxe, he just played it on a regular guitar. So
Okay.
that's what it was like interesting where like, why would you use the SynthAxe when you could just play it on a regular guitar unless you just wanted, those sounds. Whereas like Looking Glass and Non-Brute Condiment, you needed to switch between fifths and standard. So I understand why you would use it for that. Some of the more intricate SynthAxe tunes he didn't use it for. Even ones that wouldn't be anything, too crazy. I was surprised that he didn't perform. He only used, out of all the songs that he wrote with the SynthAxe, which is a lot, he only used the SynthAxe for, I think, 6 or 7 different tunes, and one of them he didn't write. It was just like he just providing backing. So almost all the time when he's using the SynthAxe, it's really for three songs. It's Looking Glass, Pudwood, and Non-Brute Condiment, and that was like a majority of what he used it for. I was gonna say I mentioned this last time when Alan got his SynthAxe stolen. What was interesting, that's why I had asked you guys if you had any information about it. Right before I did the video of Alan's history with it, I had posted it in the group, like, does anyone know any information? Because in my mind, he stopped using it in 1990 live. So I'm like, well, how did he get it stolen? Like, it must have been stolen at a gig, because that's what everyone said, but it didn't make any sense. Yeah. Apparently, Steve Hunt, who I think you guys know, the keyboard player, actually on that tour where you went, Mal, to help Alan out in Milan, I think it was. That was the first time Steve played with the band, because he was not that tour, that show, but that tour, because by that time they were a 3-piece. So he's playing the SynthAxe stuff, and then once it went to the solos, they were playing with a backing track. So they was playing the chords during the solo, and eventually they got sick of it, and he asked Steve, who was Stanley Clarke's keyboard player, hey, can you sit in for these tunes and do them? So Steve actually responded to my comment, and he said something like, well, I don't remember what it was stolen, but it got me it got me a story about how it got stolen. And what was interesting is that he said that Alan just wanted to use it for some weekend shows that they had in like 1994. So I think he attempted to bring it back for any shows that might have been just local, because it was at some bar in LA, the Catalina Bar and Grill or something. So the story was they were loading in gear, and I think there was some homeless guy that was just hanging around that said, "I'll help you, guys bring in gear for some money."
Yeah.
And they politely said no, and they were playing there for like 5 days. So this was a Friday or something, and they load in the gear, and then they're going to leave to go back to the hotel room, and the homeless guy was still there, and he asked Alan, do you have any money? So apparently, from what Steve told me, he pulled out a wad of money, but it was all like ones or something. Maybe it was like $10 of just ones. And he handed it to the guy, and he said that the guy looked at it, and he called Alan a cheapskate. And he just, I guess, I ran off. So they all had a laugh. They went back, and then they came back to the gig, and they were playing the first tune. And then they, after the first tune was over, they looked over, they realized the SynthAxe got stolen off the stage. So it still had all the cables and all the gear and everything, all the synths. It just didn't have the controller. And I found audio of Alan saying like, "Oh, does anyone have a SynthAxe?" And, just joking around with it. And he's like, "I'm not too worried." But what was odd is that the songs that he normally would play on the SynthAxe, they still played that night, Pudwood and Looking Glass. So I just thought it was strange because those were the tunes that he would use it for. And then like they rehearsed with the SynthAxe, Steve told me. And then
one of the things that probably didn't come out of that story, and never would in America, of course, is that Alan is from a place called Yorkshire, and Yorkshiremen are incredibly, notoriously tight with their money.
I mean, the guy spent $100,000 worth of, worth of synth gear and SynthAxe stuff. But
Yeah. Well, that's my London humour and your New York not humour.
You reminded me, Mal, of a phone call I took once, which was from Douglas Adams.
Oh,
Hitchhiker's
yes.
Guide. Douglas Adams rang up.
We actually feature in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Do we?
Oh, yes, we do.
Really?
Didn't
Oh,
know
yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah. And in the corner is a left-handed SynthAxe. Tell the story.
Well, that's all the story is. He wanted to know, could he have a left-handed SynthAxe?
Yeah.
And I had to say no.
And you'll find it in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Wow. Didn't know that.
And I can't remember what chapter it is or where it is. Well, you'll probably be able to Google it or something, won't you?
Yeah.
And in the corner is a left-handed SynthAxe.
That's what he wanted.
And nobody knows what the hell that is. You read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's all sorts of crazy shit going on there. And who the hell would recognise that? Apart from you or I. And now John, of course.
Oh, that's
John, you got a lot of secrets here.
Yeah, no, that was great.
We should charge you for all these secrets.
You're already going to get my money in a bit. The other things that I wanted to ask, there was another thing that you touched upon that was like I glazed over it, but someone mentioned, which was nice because it came at like the last 3 seconds of the interview or something. So like the person watched the whole thing. You mentioned about Alan going to some sort of music college. I don't think anyone's ever heard this or talked about it before because you said something about Graham Atha, and I was like, I don't know much about Alan during that history, but as far as we know, he was basically self-taught and didn't go to any music, formal music school or anything like that.
Yeah, I might have made that up.
Okay. That was a long time ago, but
because I knew Graham quite well, and for some reason or the other, I've got stuck in my head the fact they went to the same music college, but that might have got mixed up with they were both born in Yorkshire, or they
went to the same pub.
Eh?
They went to the same pub.
Yeah, or it might have been they were both English.
Okay, so that's not I wanted to just touch on that.
Both male and over 6 foot. I don't know. I don't know where they can.
Oh, you just misremembered. It happens.
Well, Christ, I mean, it's a long time ago, man. I mean, this. I've had several lifetimes since then.
Most of this stuff we're just making up on the fly.
Hey?
Well, that's pretty impressive because I'm able to verify a majority of it.
There is one person I've just thought of, and again, a Yorkshireman, lived just outside of Bradford, knew all of Alan's stuff, was a phenomenally obtuse player. So I think he was left-handed, and he did play the SynthAxe. John Marazzi, and he was another guy like, you know, I said not everybody famous bought SynthAxes, but a lot of people did buy SynthAxes. Maurizio, oh, for God's sake, Chapman. But he was a phenomenally innovative player. Very, very skillful, an exponent of a SynthAxe, and an amazing. He had a music shop just outside a place called Holdsworth, which is the heart of the English industrial north, just not far from Bradford. Again, and I have no idea why that area of England, it's a bit like Newcastle and Dire Straits and Sting and all that sort of thing. Why does that produce so many really cracking, really, really good musicians? But Yorkshire seems to do it, and I'm trying to riff over this to try and get my brain in gear to remember who the guy was. John well worth listening to. So well worth listening to. He had a music shop and a studio upstairs, so well thought of, but nobody could understand what the hell he was doing on guitar. So he played a right-handed guitar with strung upside down, all really, really crazy stuff. But fun. If you're into a bit of avant-garde jazz, it was good enough to. Well, good enough. It definitely was good enough to put into that category. John DiMaurizio.
Alan mentioned that Steinberg wrote software. There's a interview that he does where he's showing all of his like Atari 1040s or whatever. He goes, and he was using Cubase 3 or something. He said he was using Steinberg Cubase 3. He goes, he uses it with the SynthAxe because it was the last time they wrote software for it. Do you remember working with Steinberg with or what makes it specific that why it was designed for recording the SynthAxe that other things didn't?
I don't think it was
the only
designed.
software to cope with it.
Yeah, I don't think it was specifically designed for the SynthAxe, but I think that Pro 24, which is what Steinberg released before Cubase was available, was written properly. It was solid code, and it recorded the SynthAxe. And the thing that was crucial about the SynthAxe to get the legato note update, so you could slide notes and stuff like that, was the sequence of note on and note off messages. They had to be exactly as sent by the SynthAxe. But after Pro 24, or maybe it's after Cubase 3, if that's the case, they messed it up. And I don't know whether the time stamping wasn't accurate. I think the messages were time stamped rather than sequence recorded. So that obviously all the MIDI messages were recorded as they came in to the computer. But I think that rather than just sorting through them sequentially in the order they came in from the instrument, I think they were time stamped and then processed. And what happened is that you lost the close relationship between note on and note off, so that sometimes it wouldn't play back the way it was played when you played it, which is, you would never notice it with anything other than the SynthAxe. But it made Cubase useless for a SynthAxe, and pretty much every software since, other than John Hollis's Trackman, which he wrote specifically for the SynthAxe, has had that problem. And I was using Cubase in the 90s, and not only was it crashing every 2 seconds, but it wouldn't record the SynthAxe properly.
Well, I got quite heavily involved in all that, but I've just been up to one of my shelves where I found some of the software that I used to have to take the SynthAxe around to these people who had written software, and try, see what the SynthAxe or how the SynthAxe would react And obviously, yeah, there's the Steinberg, which at that time was working perfectly okay. This was another little gem that people phoned us up and said, "Oh, look, can we do that?" So that was another one which didn't work. And this was another one. Oh, look, I've still got the disc. Look at this.
Ah, wow.
Look at that. Hey,
Hard disc.
takes you back, and look, there's a dongle in there as well. Look.
Yes.
And that was the firm, Iconics. And that didn't work either. That was. I mean, I used to go around. Also, I mean, the number of things that I used to do that weren't. I mean, I never had a job description really, and it was a good job really because it would have got rewritten every week, I think. And just that one, Iconics, was in Wandsworth in London. And I can't remember the people that were involved in it, but they were just one of many. And the reason I think was because the whole synth, the whole MIDI controller, the whole music business was so dynamic at the time. It was racing away, and we were part of it. And I'm proud to say that we were at the forefront. And trust me, I'm not the technical guy. I'm not the clever guy. I just love doing it, and still would. If somebody gave me the opportunity tomorrow to do it, and I'm 75 years old now, I'd go, yeah, all right, let's do that, because I still believe in it. It gave me so much inspiration. And the last thing I did in the music business was with I think I might have mentioned it in the last interview with a guy called Daniel Steinhardt, who invented the gig rig Pro 14 and the gig rig G2, and there's only been two things that I've been really passionate about in the music business, and the SynthAxe was one, the gig rig, and the man himself, I think, is just inspirational and dedicated. Sometimes you get periods in your life, or periods in time where you find inspiration and you find people who are technically very, very adept, or they've got a drive. And I think Bill Aiken was. Alec, would you say that? I mean, I know he had his flaws, but
oh yeah, no, he was
driven, wasn't he?
He made things happen. Yeah.
He's driven, and I think that's kind of why SynthAxe came about, really, because
any sane person would have given up with all the problems he faced.
But I think that's what happens with businessmen, and engineers as well. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade. I'm an aircraft engineer by trade, and I'm a fully indentured aircraft engineer. And if somebody gives me a problem, or somebody mentions something as a problem, I don't regard it as a conversational piece. I regard it as a challenge. I want to fix stuff, And I think Bill was like that, and I think Branson's like it as well. I think Branson's probably like it in a business sense, and he's just a master craftsman. I just love that. I love that positive attitude, and it's probably, I know it's an American thing, but and us Brits are meant to be sort of laid back and laissez-faire about stuff. Well, that's French, of course. Not want to bring them into it, of course, but I just think that that Alec and all the people, Roger Bowley and Paul Delaney, that everybody in that firm was on board.
Yeah. Well,
Don't you think?
Yeah, and one of the crazy things was about you had to be a guitar player to be on the team. How cool is that?
Everybody in there was a guitar player, you know, and
Apart from Pam.
hey,
Apart from Pam, I don't think she played guitar, did she?
no, Pam didn't play it.
But I'm going to have to go, guys. It's been
Great to see you again, Alec.
been a blast. Yeah.
And listen. The one really cool thing about this is I don't need to see you for a coffee because we've now got nothing to talk about. We want to do this through in New York. I mean, how mad is that? You live about half an hour.
There's a lot of guitars that need playing. We should have told him about that time we were busking in Oxford.
Oh man, that was a great day.
That's the one to finish on, isn't it?
That's a great day.
I was busking in Oxford, and a guy comes up and he gives me his card and he invites me into the shopping precinct. Now, you're not allowed to busk in there. It's kind of controlled space. You'd get moved on if you just turned up and set up there. But he liked my playing and he said, come in. So I go into the precinct and who walks by but Mal? Now, I don't sing. I'm an instrumentalist, but Mal sings. So he joins, we get together and we start busking together. Mal singing and me playing guitar, I think. That's what my memory says. And we had a hat and we started collecting money, and we started collecting quite a lot of money. So after an hour or so, we go down the pub to spend some of the money. And so we have a few pints and then we start busking in the pub. And I can't remember what I was using. It must have been an electric guitar and a small amp, I would imagine.
I have no idea.
But there was a woman who really liked us and she lent us her shoe. And then the shoe got passed round to get more money. And we just kept earning more money and buying more beer. And that's where my memory becomes very hazy.
Yes. That was a great day. I don't even know what I was doing in Oxford, but all I remember was, what the hell is he doing here? And all of a sudden, the day just turned into complete mayhem.
It was a 5-hour party as far as I can remember.
Yeah, it was. No, it was. But what about? I've never thought about it before, but we didn't end at the end of it. We didn't end up with any money because
we spent it all on that.
Just drunk it all.
We bought everybody pints. We bought our table pints and stuff. We had so much money, we couldn't believe it. And let's blow it all.
Yeah. Well, it was your playing, not my singing. I know that. Alec, great to see you. John,
you
great
too.
to see you. Okay, Alec, to our next party.
Yep.
You did come to that party where I got all the SynthAxe guys together, didn't you?
Don't think so.
Yes, you did, surely.
Yeah.
Where Roger Bowley was there, Nev was there.
Doesn't ring any bells.
Didn't I invite you? Had we fallen out or something?
I probably wasn't answering the phone. I've really got to go.
Bye-bye.
That means I'm going to end the call, yeah?
All right. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Learned a ton. Until next time.
Ta-da.
Bye, guys.